The goal is not to let whatever happens. The goal is to incline our heart so that all of these resources, this beautiful life that God has for you, that Jesus paid on the cross for you, is actually released into your world so you can see immediate change wherever you're walking. I have my grandma, I should start by saying my grandma and my grandpa, they had this beautiful cabin that we used to grow up at. We used to go to all the time at Lake Manitoba, in Canada. Depends where you're watching, might not know where that's from. And my grandma and grandpa, I'm not sure if your grandma and grandpa's places had this, but they had all these like couches and chairs, but they had this one recliner that was known as grandma's chair. And they had this other recliner, which was known as grandpa's chair. Like these chairs were only ever sat in when grandma was in her chair or when grandpa was in her chair, or when some of the young grandkids would be trying to sneak into their chair because this was like a special chair that was only for grandma and grandpa. They were the lazy boys. They were the recliners. They had the perfect angle at the TV and the rest of the living room when hanging out with family. Maybe your grandparents had that. I actually remember my grandpa's chair. For some reasons, I remember it was this brown, furry, felty type of chair. I remember it being incredibly comfortable. And I remember being a young kid when my grandpa would be partially reclining, so not really, but maybe his feet were up and he'd be watching golf or watching something, and I would sneak around to the side of his chair, and it had this big, long wooden handle. I'm sure you remember what those are. And I would grab it and I would try to pull it back because it would be a funny prank to have my grandpa sitting and all of a sudden the chair would instantly recline all the way back and his feet would go up and you give him a startle, you give him a scare, and he kind of jump at you or try to swat and see who was there doing it. And we would do this as cousins every so often to try to get my grandpa to recline or to incline, depending on the position he was. And there's this verse I wanted to talk about, and it says in Psalm 119:2. What this says, it says, I incline my heart to perform your statutes forever. The psalmist is talking to God here, and what he's saying, I incline my heart to your statutes forever. I incline. So it's an interesting choice of words when they say this. In order to actually incline your heart, that must mean that your heart is not in that current position. To incline something means that maybe your heart has been in decline. So we're going to dive into the key of this, which it has to do with our heart. See, our heart, as I titled the message, A Rite of Passage, our heart is the passageway from what God has done to our spirit, which has made it righteous, made it whole, made it clean, the fruits of the Spirit, all the things that are encompassed in God and who He is and what He promises for you happens in your spirit. But it does not mean that happens instantly in your world. But our heart is the passageway which releases all of these things in our inner man, in our spirit man, which is righteous and holy because of Jesus. It releases it into our reality. And what this is saying here, it's really interesting how it says, I were to incline my heart, which I mentioned earlier. It's an interesting choice of words because it means that the heart was naturally in decline. It means that it takes a choice. It means that you have to posture. It means that wherever you are at, you need to figure out and see, is my heart healthy? Is my heart whole? Am I inclining it towards what God says, or has it been in decline too long? Hey, you know what? Some of our hearts, some of our lives have actually not been in decline. We've actually been in recline mode, hey, where you've just been relaxing and you've been chilling and maybe become just dormant in your life and you've just let whatever your eyes see, whatever your ears hear, whatever your words and your emotions are welling up, maybe you've let that just naturally dictate what goes on in your world. But if you didn't know this, all of those things that we're putting out, we're seeing, we're hearing, that we're speaking is fixing, and it is posturing our heart in a certain direction. Now, has our heart been postured in a right direction, or has it been postured in a wrong direction? Because the psalmist is saying, I incline my heart to perform your statutes forever. See, it's not just about outward behavioral change. We're looking for actual real change. And what does that look like? If we posture our heart, what are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to get God's peace. We're trying to release God's joy, God's health, God's kindness, God's integrity, God's power, His passion, all of these things that come with this sozo life that is promised to us at salvation. We are trying to release and that we are trying to bring into reality. Are you following me so far? The goal is not to let whatever happens. The goal is to incline our heart so that all of these resources, this beautiful life that God has for you, that Jesus paid on the cross for you, is actually released into your world so you can see immediate change wherever you're walking, wherever you're going, in the present, in the now. You are in charge of your heart. You see, the heart is the channel which the life of God and what's in our spirit is released into our life. So you got to ask yourself the question, is my heart, which is a passageway, is it healthy? Is it clogged? Is it too dirty? Is there too much crap in there that's holding things back? Because our heart can actually be like that. In other words, some of you need to go through this rite of passage, and the term rite of passage means basically when somebody is transferring from one area or one people group into another area or another people group. And what we're talking about is all of these joys and the beautifulness of God getting the rite of passage to flow from out of our spirit man into our actual reality of life. Your heart is the passageway. Your heart is a passageway. We got to start thinking about our heart. As I mentioned earlier, this is a missing piece that happens all the time with Christians. Christians who haven't experienced change. Maybe you've been in a situation where you've given your life to Jesus. You've been in that beautiful moment. Maybe it's in the church service. Maybe it's with a friend. And you've seen this life of someone who's following Jesus. And it looked attractive to you. It looked beautiful to you. And you've seen this. You've accepted. You said, Jesus, I want you in my life. Help me out. Be with me. Guide me. You've done all that where now you fall. And you've all of a sudden felt a difference in your life. Immediately when that happened, your spirit was made whole. Your spirit is now righteous, which means it is pure and cleansed and it's good in the sight of God simply because of a decision you made to believe in Jesus. You might have immediately felt joy in your life. You might have felt change in your life. You might have seen things through a new perspective. This hope for life might have been welled up inside of you. Maybe you're way more loving to people and kind to people and you're noticing things are going good in your life. Maybe you've been there. This is a story that unfortunately happens all too often. And the turning point is that does not seem to last for a lot of believers. There tends to be a decline from this beautiful experience, and it doesn't translate into lasting change. Is that you? Have you been in that position? Have you felt that before? Maybe you know somebody who has. Maybe you're with someone who's been going through that. Well, I'm here to tell you that God hasn't changed. Okay? God has not changed. Salvation hasn't changed. The terms of salvation haven't changed. The terms of salvation simply are if you believe in your heart and you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you are saved, you have salvation. That suddenly didn't change. It's not like somebody wrote a new chapter of the Bible that overrode where it says what we have to do to have faith in Jesus. It's not like that's changed. The thing that's changed is your heart has changed. Your heart has changed. God hasn't changed. Maybe in areas of my life, maybe my heart has changed. I'm harping on this because we need to know and understand the power of our heart, because our thoughts, our words, what we're ingesting, all influence our heart. You have power over your heart. See, when Jesus came into your life, God made your spirit beautiful. You have now access to the kingdom of God in your life now. Things that you're dealing with, you now have the power of God behind you to deal with those and to move on and to win. Amen? You have that. That is yours. But somewhere along the way, if we aren't careful with what our heart is ingesting, we can clog our heart up. We can fill our heart with the wrong things. Our spirit, see, the spirit inside of us can be full of God's life, God's joy, healing, God's health, God's peace. That can be all inside of our spirit, man. But the condition of your heart can keep that from becoming a reality in your life. Man, that was so good. I'm going to tell you that one more time because you need to understand that. God's joy, God's peace, God's spirit can all be in, can be. It is your spirit. It's welled up inside of you if you've given your life to Jesus. But the condition of your heart can keep all of those beautiful things from becoming a reality into your life now. And the thing is, our heart can only be changed by our thinking. See, our spirit is changed by God. Our heart, the Bible even says that we get a new heart as well. That's why we experience that instantaneous, greatest change we've ever had in our life at that salvation moment when we put our faith in Jesus. But the lasting change comes from the thinking and the habits that you are putting into your heart. If we are not on purpose about what we're building our heart, like the psalmist says, if we're not inclining our heart to God's statutes, to His word, the beautiful things that He says, if we're not doing that, we are slowly clogging our heart. We're slowly declining our heart. You might not notice it right off the hop. Maybe month 1 is good. Maybe month 3 is good. Maybe the first year isn't too bad. But then all of a sudden we start seeing these other things in life, things that we used to have, where we used to have God's joy in situations, where we used to have peace in situations that now is causing us stress, causing us anxiety. Maybe we're noticing that we feel like we don't have the God's faith anymore for health or healing in our life. Well, what's been happening, guaranteed what's been happening, because God hasn't changed, is your heart has been getting clogged with things that you've been allowing to set in it. And we need to get back into the habit of ripping out all of that old stuff that is clogging the passageway, that is stopping the joy, the peace, the patience, the love, the health, all these things that are in our spirit. We need to pull out those things that are stopping us from exemplifying that and that being a reality in our life now. We were originally intended to be like God in terms of we are created in His image and in His likeness. This is our God-given identity. We all have a yearning, we all have a desire in us when we give our life to Jesus to be able to operate in this identity, to flow in this identity, to have the power of God in our life so that we can actually see beautiful things happen to the people that we love around us.